Welcome to the Clear to Close podcast with your host, local mortgage expert Ryan Bolton. Ryan has the questions and answers, tips and tricks, do's and don'ts, and expert guests to explain all the steps needed to buy or sell real estate. And now it's time for the Clear to Close podcast.
Hey everyone, my name's Ryan Bolton and I am a mortgage nerd. And part of our show, I like to bring on guests and experts onto the show to help you with anything involving real estate and the mortgage world. And I really find that real estate planning, trust, living wills, those types of things are very underutilized. In fact, just recently I had a client that was telling me the horror story of going through months of probate, where if they would have just done their estate planning ahead of time, they would have been able to avoid a ton of that. So I want to get the expert when it comes to trusts and legal planning of that sort. And I've got Jim Burch with me right now with Easy Legal Planning. So Jim, I really appreciate you coming on the show and being an expert. And we have a fun little thing we want to do with everybody too. If you follow the show and you use his services, he's going to take $100 off setting up his trust. So let's kind of talk about you first. What got you into the industry? What led you to be doing this kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for letting me be here and be a part of this today. Yeah, so I've been in this world a little over 23 years now. It makes me, that's hence the gray beard. That's where we're coming in here with that. But yeah, so I initially started out working at a law firm, and I found something out very quickly. This was a big need. Everyone wanted it. Everyone needed it, but it was expensive. And so people would come in there and they'd sit down with the attorneys and they wanted to get it done. But then when they heard the price tag, they were like, oh, maybe not so much. So they walked back out the door. And so I remember, talking to one of the attorneys. I was like, why don't you give them a deal? If you gave them a discount, it's a money thing for them, and they'd totally do this. And he's like, well, if we give them a deal, then they're going to tell their friends and family, and we're going to have to give them a deal, and then we're essentially just going to shoot ourselves in the foot and devalue our product. So I said, okay, that makes sense. But then I said, why don't we take more of like an educational online approach where we can educate people, and then you guys can just draft the documents on the tail end of things. So that way they're still getting state-specific attorney-drafted documents, but we can cut the cost substantially. Now, keep in mind, this was the early 2000s, so the internet was not what it is today. So anyhow, they were like, well, yeah, you can do that, and yeah, we can do that, but no one's going to do that. And then because of our price point, it just kind of took off. So that was really how I kind of started to get into this. And now, we're on a national platform, and so we have documents for every single state. So we work in all 50 states, and everything's state-specific attorney drafted. So it works out well.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how many people don't realize they even need a trust until they need it. It's really one of those things like even life insurance. People don't need it until all of a sudden something happens, then they can't get it. But I'm telling you what, I've seen so many times where people just get the title done in their individual names, joint survivor, joint tenants, that type of stuff, which has some at least protection if you pass away and your spouse is still in the home. Right. But you still have to deal with probate of that asset. You have to deal with all the other issues. Or people think that trusts are just for people that have multiple properties or big estates and all this kind of thing. And I'm telling you what, the cost that you guys have set up is so much better to allow everybody to do it. There really isn't a reason not to do it. There really isn't. And if you're moving from state to state, you can still make those documents and make sure they're done properly as well.
Absolutely.
Because we see a lot of people moving from California or other areas. That's one of the first questions they'll ask me if they have a trust is how do I get kind of transfer from California to, say, Utah, that type of thing. So what is kind of the basic cost? I mean, obviously it's going to be, if there's a lot of different properties, it may change that basic price, but what's kind of the basic cost to do it?
Here's the great news is we do everything in straight flat fees. So our fees don't really go up or down based off of complexity or how much money people have. So our standard revocable trust package, and that actually includes 10 documents. So that's the trust, wills, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, living wills. We charge $695. There is a $15 shipping, so it's $710. So I just tell people, it's $710. But like we talked about, we're going to have a little promo, and those that want to do this, we'll give a $100 discount. Now, the only additional cost is the cost for deed preparation. So somebody did have, they're like, hey, we want you to transfer the title of our property over into the trust. So we have to prepare the deed. We charge $250 to do a deed. So if somebody had multiple properties, then that can get a little bit, more expensive on that. But
even the more properties they have, the more reason they even should have the trust.
100%.
It's not something where you have to have a lot to make it work, but the more you have, the more it just makes more and more sense, the more assets you have that need that protection. Otherwise, you're going to have all kinds of issues with probate. Like I said, I just had a client. We just closed for him, and we had all kinds of issues using the income from the pension and the settlement they were getting because it was going to the deceased husband, which now was going into probate. I mean, it really was just a headache above all the other things that can really easily be avoided for the costs that you're talking about.
Absolutely. One thing that I always teach people that people just kind of don't really think about, and probably one of the easiest ways to explain this is I teach people everything in the estate planning world, it revolves around signatures. Really and truly, it revolves around signatures. And so I tell people, while you're alive, you can do whatever you want with your property and assets because you can sign on the dotted line. But if you die, that signature dies with you, and then you're not able to sign the deed of your house over to your children or loved ones. Right. And so it has to go to court and go through probate. And for those that aren't very familiar with probate, just on a very, very high level, really what's happening in probate is the court is stepping in to represent the dead people. The court basically steps in and says, okay, right. Husband and wife are dead. They're no longer alive and able to sign on the dotted line. So we as the court, we're going to step in to represent them, and we're going to oversee the transfer of assets. And it just takes time and money.
Right. That's the biggest thing. You really want the state or the courts or somebody deciding what you're doing with those assets versus being able to do it ahead of time. Like you said, when you can make the decisions, make the signatures, do whatever you need to do to put those protections in place. But there's also some tax savings. So you always hear about the cost basis going up and things like that. Can you kind of explain, when the parents give that asset to the kids or it goes into the trust and then all of a sudden that asset goes, what happens with that cost basis difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another huge thing about doing your estate planning is making sure that when the time comes that mom and dad pass away and the assets do transfer to the kids, if they've got things done the proper way, those assets will receive a step up in basis. And again, for those of the that are listening, they're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Let me give you a perfect example. My mom and dad, they bought their home back in 1972 it was $24,000, which I can't even hardly believe that. I'm like, $24,000 for a house. Well, anyhow, when I started doing this, I was like, Dad, we need to set up a trust. And he's like, I got this covered. I'm just going to put you and your sister, on the title of all of the assets. Yeah. And then when we die, you guys can have everything. And I said, Dad, don't do that. And he was almost offended because he was like, what do you mean? I'm doing you a favor. I'm putting you on our assets. And when we die, it'll be really easy. And I said, well, there's two problems with doing that, Dad. I said, number one, if you put us on the title of the property and either myself or my sister have any type of a liability, bankruptcy, tax lien, we get sued, divorced, whatever, they come after my parents' home because we're listed as owners. So I'm like, liability-wise, you don't want that. And then I said, the second reason is I said, Dad, if you and Mom pass away and we go to sell the house, if we're already on the title, we don't get to inherit the property. We have to pay, the capital gains taxes. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, how much did you buy the house for? And he said, $24,000. And I said, how much?
Sandwich and a handshake.
Right. And I said, well, how much could you sell the house for now? And he said, no, I don't know, probably, $350,000. And I said, well, if we did kind of simple math online, I said, if you and Mom passed away and we sold the home for $350,000 and you bought it for $24,000, that means there's been a $326,000 gain, and we'd have to pay capital gains taxes on that, roughly around 20%. And I'm like, Dad, don't do that. And so by having these assets into the trust, then when my parents pass away, then those assets get a step up in basis. So if all of a sudden my mom and dad died and that house is now worth $500,000, we get to sell it for $500,000 and we don't pay anything in capital gains taxes.
That's so huge, and people don't realize just by adding on title, that doesn't really avoid that step.
Right.
Putting in an LLC doesn't avoid that step. I mean, and you're going to have the issue if somebody has passed away, you're going to have that death certificate. There's title work that's going to have to say, okay, that person's still a part owner of that property. Does it still have to go through probate? Just because you're on title when somebody passes away doesn't mean the property is then just available to go. Right. Now, it's quicker, from my understanding, when there's other owners and that's the only owner that's passed away, but there's still legal processes that you can avoid by having it set up ahead of time, especially when it's so much more cost effective. I would agree with you. Most people thought trusts were $5,000 and $6,000, and there's some big, maybe not quite that high, way back, 20 years ago, but it's become so much more cost effective because of the streamlining of the process, the way that things have been done. Are you seeing different states that cost a lot more money, or is it pretty much a flat fee across most states, or is there any states that are heavier when it comes to trusts?
Absolutely, there's states that are heavier. Okay. As you get closer to the coastlines, whether it's the East Coast or the West Coast, the price goes up, a lot. So California, kind of the average cost that I hear day in and day out, because I hear a lot of people that are like, well, we went and sat down with an attorney and they quoted us about $4,000, is pretty common throughout. And then as you get closer to the shorelines, it can go, I hear $5,000 and $6,000. I've heard up to, $10,000 to get a very basic trust done. And that's expensive.
It really is. It makes most people not want to do it.
Right.
But then as soon as they go to have to deal with probate or deal with the issues, and even if it's not so much a cost difference that's the problem, the time. I mean, so many of these things take months, 6 months to get resolved, especially if there is any kind of dispute. Heaven forbid there is a dispute between family members or issues or business partners or anything that can happen as we're going through this life, especially if you're dealing with real estate, that having something a little bit more cost effective can really make a big deal. So I'm a really big believer in getting a trust. So that's why I wanted to bring you on. We're doing the discount. If you mention Mortgage Nerd, that's just the name of the show, kind of the name of what we're doing here. That's where you get the discount. But also something really fun we're going to do is for everybody that comments on this video that says, I need a trust, you'll be entered into a drawing to get yours for free. Now, that's the basic part. If you've got other properties and other things, there'll be some added fees. But that initial cost, because we believe in getting a trust so much here, we want to help you and do that. So we thought it'd be fun to just give one away. So not only are you getting a $100 discount, but one of you will get it completely for free by just putting in the comment. So like, share this video, send it out to anybody you know, family members, parents that really do need to get this out of the way so we can get it done. It is that important. I believe in it that much. I'm willing to help the cost to get you to have a trust. It's just huge. And for having it be this much more cost effective to at least get in and get it started, you've got to get it done. So again, in the comments, I need a trust. You'll be entered into a drawing. We'll do that on July 1st. So send this video out to everybody that needs a trust.
I love it. That's the other thing I was going to mention. A lot of people feel it's overwhelming. Like some of the listeners maybe go, oh, is this going to be like a total time suck? Is this going to take me months and months to get this done? And one of the biggest compliments that we get frequently is people, they'll call us back or they'll email us and they're like, if I would have known it was going to be this easy, I would have done this years ago, because they just feel like it's going to be this big overwhelming process. And we've really tried to just streamline the process to make it super easy. And just as a teaser, some of the questions that people usually ask, they're like, what types of questions do I need to be able to answer before I can get started?
Right.
And we've tried to keep things simple, and we say there's really 5 big questions that you have to be able to answer. Number 1, who's going to be in control of the money when you die? So if husband and wife pass away,
and how often are you going to change it?
Right. You know, and the thing is, you can change as often as you want as long as you're alive. We get that every once in a while. We get a client that's like, my child's not being very nice to me this week. They're out. And then they'll call us back a half a year later and they're like, we've mended fences. Let's put them back in. So that, again, you can totally do that.
So number 1, who's going to control?
Who's going to be in control of the money? A lot of times I use the word executor. Technically, it's not an executor in a trust. They're called successor trustees. But when I say successor trustee, people are like, I have no idea what that is. So I'm like, just your executor. So the person's going to execute and carry out your wishes. And that can be one person. It could be 2 people. They could work together. They can work separately. Really, it could be more than that. The only stipulation is they have to be over the age of 18 and live in the United States with doing that. So that's the first thing.
Number 1.
The second thing is you have to name your beneficiaries. You have to know where you want things to go. Now, a lot of parents go, well, that's pretty easy. Isn't that our kids? Typically, yes. But it doesn't have to be. It could be kids, grandkids, church, charity, foundation.
I've seen a ton of that where they deed it to a trust or a school or somewhere where they want to be a part of it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you can do all sorts of things. But again, you have to kind of know how you want things to go, because on our questionnaire, it says, if you die, where do you want things to go? And they can just map things out. The third question is guardians for minor children. Now, obviously, that's only applicable if you have kids that are under the age of 18. If you don't have kids that are under the age of 18, consider yourself lucky you don't have to make that decision, because that's a hard decision to make. Right. The fourth question they have to answer is if you're incapacitated. So if you're incapacitated and you need somebody to step in and take over financially, who's that going to be? A lot of times people will pick the same person as the executor, because most people go, whether I'm dead or incapacitated, this is who I trust to handle the money, so we'll just do it that way. Okay. And then the fifth and final question is your medical power of attorney or your healthcare directive. So if you're in the hospital and you need somebody to step in and make medical decisions and communicate with the doctors on what procedures to do or pull the plug, who do you want doing that?
And that's the commonly known as the do not resuscitate or DNR. Is that the most common document that you have in there ready to go for that? Or is it something where it's just up to that person to sign that DNR?
It's up to that person. So, and every state's a little bit different. I mean, the healthcare directives are different, from state to state. And some states give you tons of options. And some states are, nope, if you sign this, you are authorizing us to pull the plug with that. So it just kind of depends from state to state.
Because you've seen that in television shows, how they glamorize that whole thing of, you signed a DNR, but we really don't think so. This person makes the decision. We don't want them to make it, so we're going to go to court to fight that. And again, those things can be mitigated dramatically if it's already set up ahead of time of what you want to do. And I've told my wife, if I get a paper cut and it puts me on a ventilator, you pull that plug.
Right? Like pull that baby as quickly as possible.
So it's something where, but just telling her that may be something where my brothers or sisters like, no, he would want to live. Look, his heartbeat's doing. So it's really important to have those conversations, and you don't want to wait till it's too late.
Totally.
So much of what we're talking about is preventative, and so much of it is faster dealing with this right now than it is after you're passed away or your spouse has to deal with it. Like my wife doesn't know a lot about the financial stuff. She does her stuff. I kind of do mine. So if I were to just go away, she would it really put her in a horrible situation. Right. Another reason I really push life insurance, they're just the cost effectiveness of having that coverage. But once you have that set up, the next very thing you need to do is a trust. And it really, talking with you and everybody I've talked to, they always worry about the time and the money. And I think this solves it. So if you're on the fence with getting it, don't wait any longer. Get it done. This is really something that can save you a lot of time, money, or just the burden on your family members that have to figure this all out without you being involved, at least in the planning of it.
Right.
And as far as the time it takes, I tell you what, it's going to take longer to get a mortgage than it is to get the trust done in many cases, especially if you have those things already outlined.
Exactly, because if you had those things outlined and the questionnaire got filled out, our process, we have everything done in about a week. So we'll have everything done in about a week, and then once the docs are done, we email a short summary so you can just give it a preview, make sure we've got names spelled correctly, people are in the right positions. It's interesting. I hear that quite a lot where people are like, I had a trust drafted a long time ago and there's so many errors. Like people's names are spelled wrong. And I'm like, wait, what? Why didn't you have them correct that? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just didn't really think about it. And I was like, oh no. So we do those types of things to prevent any type of like a name being spelled the wrong way or birth dates. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know their kids' birth dates. Truthfully, they know the date, but they don't know the year. That throws everybody off. But
it's funny. Every once in a while you have on your phone where you can pick like your birthday, and every once in a while it's a calendar and it'll tell you the day. Back in the thing. And I always ask my mom, hey, do you remember what day it was? And she had no idea.
Yeah.
So it was a Tuesday. So now it was just funny that I happened to see that. But it is funny how people will have that off. I even had one where the middle initial was wrong, and it caused all kinds of issues. We had to get all kinds of different paperwork, all because that was wrong. So if people are relocating and they're coming from California to Utah, is that a good advice to them to just kind of review that? Is there a requirement for them to move that trust into Utah?
Great question. It's not required, but it is absolutely a good idea because, again, everything is state specific. Every state has different codes and statutes. The healthcare directives are different between every state. And so what we typically do is if somebody was moving in from out of state, normally we prepare what's called a restated amendment. So an amendment means a change. Restate means we are redoing it. Okay. So the trust still keeps the same name.
So you don't have to do the whole thing over again. It's just like an addendum, essentially.
Well, good question. So we typically do end up redoing almost everything. So that way it's completely updated. It's 2024 compliant, has everything done the proper way, but the name of the trust stays the same and the date that they originally signed it. So sometimes people will have a trust from 20 years ago, but the trust still keeps that same date. And the reason why it keeps the same name and the date is if they already have assets that are transferred to that trust, we don't want them to have to go back and like retitle property. We just keep the title in the name of the trust and the date. It all matches, but then we can update all the documents themselves and any of the rules to match anything that's current.
Is that probably the most common change you have to do is obviously assets. So a property, if they relocate, they've sold the property in California and they now bought one here, they need to put that in there. Is it medical is probably the next most common thing that has to be adjusted within the trust, or is it mostly assets?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a combination of both. And it's also a combination of just life has changed where all of a sudden they're like, when we originally set this up, all of our kids were minors. Our kids are now, well into their 20s and 30s, and we don't need my brother to be the executor anymore. We're going to name our kids to do it. So then we can update, those types of things as well. And sometimes people will have some really tight restrictions on the kids can only get the money if they do X, Y, and Z. And as the kids get older, the parents go, we don't need that anymore. They're super responsible. Or we get the flip side that they're like, my child is so irresponsible that if we died and they got any money, they would just blow right through it. And so we need to update that to change some things. So we can do those things.
So we've laid out the importance, the tax benefits, the proration, the state taking over your assets, naming kind of what you want to do medically. What's the reason not to do a trust? I mean, I really can't think of one. So let's say, what's the reason not to do a trust?
Great question. There's two reasons why people that usually go, well, what's the downside of doing a trust? Number one is normally cost. And obviously, we've talked about that and how we can kind of, put that to the side because we've made it more cost effective enough that everyone can do it. But the second reason is when you set up a trust, you do have to fund the trust, meaning you have to transfer property and assets. And there's a little bit of legwork. It's not hard, but you have to do it. Like you have to update beneficiary designations. You have to get the deed transferred over. And again, there's a few things that you have to do. But I always tell people it's way easier to do it while you're alive and you have your signature. Because remember, if you die, that signature dies with you, and then it's got to go to court and go through probate, and then it's time and money and effort wasted for the kids. And so by doing these things ahead of time and being proactive, be proactive so your kids don't have to be reactive.
Not only that, and not, it's also the kids, but also the spouses. I see a lot of times where the husband's really the one in charge of most of the finances. Yeah. If the wife had to take over all that type of stuff, it's deer in the headlights. They either got to hire somebody, they got to trust somebody that may take advantage of them because they don't know what's going on. You're leaving your spouse, your kids up to the state or up to just somebody else that can take advantage of the situation instead of just having that outlined on what happens when those certain things kick in. Because a lot of times it's not both spouses passing away. It's usually one or the other. And so many times it's the one that didn't even know what a trust is, can't even spell the word, doesn't know what a deed of trust is, doesn't know what a mortgage is, doesn't know what a warranty deed is, doesn't know all this stuff that's out there. And all of a sudden now they have to pay even more money to go to fix it because they have to bring somebody in that can do all that for them. So that's a really good point. But I think there's so many more benefits to do it. And I think the people that are scared were cost and then maybe time or just not knowing how it works. That's why you've got to call him. I think we can put up his website real quick, Mr. Producer Guy. We're going to throw up the website right here, easylegalplanning.com. So it's very easy. You handle every state, or is it something where you handle every state?
All 50 states.
We are here in Utah. And if you're moving, you want to take a look at that too. It's just a good chance to, every time I look at people's insurances too, it's just good to kind of check it whenever you do a big move like that to really make sense to take a look at the trust. Because there might be things that, like you said, that are just old and outdated and it's really easy to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's a phone number on there as well, but easylegalplanning.com. And again, if you comment on the video, if you comment, I need a trust, you'll be entered into a drawing to get yours for free, at least the initial. If it's more heavy duty, obviously you'll have some fees, but you'll get rid of that initial first cost to be able to do it, because I'm just a huge believer that most people don't have it. I take applications almost every day and I'm amazed at how often it's in their individual names. That's it. There's no trust, living will. Sometimes you'll see an LLC, they'll want to move it into because it's a rental property or something like that. But the trust just gives you the cost basis increase, gives you those protections, and just gives directives to what happens. But the cost basis is really big. I don't think everybody realizes what you said. Whatever you bought it for, that's where it starts. And if you just put your kids on the title, they pay the taxes on that appreciation instead of jumping up to what happens.
Yep, exactly.
That can save you way more than the cost of a trust.
It can save you literally like tens of thousands. I mean, we've had some people, like speaking of California, we've had people that they bought their homes way back in the 60s, 50s for really, really cheap. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I've got a beachfront property that's now worth $2 million. And they're like, yeah, I've got my kids on the title. We're good to go. And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, anyhow, that would be very painful for the kids. And it is when the parents don't set things up the proper way, just thinking that they're doing the right thing.
Right. Just trying to avoid that fee or just thinking that, and that's better than doing probably nothing, but maybe it's not. Because it almost
I would
is worse.
beg to differ. I would say, really and truly, when it comes to capital gains taxes, it would have been better for them to die without doing anything. It goes through intestate, it go through probate, but your probate fees are going to be way cheaper than capital gains taxes.
So in that case, when it goes through the probate, and they get awarded the home, does that raise that cost basis
they
as well?
Do. They get a step up in basis through the probate.
But they have to do the probate, the time, the money, and if there is any dispute, I mean, you see disputes.
Oh, absolutely.
Family members, siblings start seeing the dollar signs, especially if you're talking about a home worth millions now or something like that. And I deal with a lot of people that have gone through divorce and passed away, and it's always 4 kids. 3 of them don't care. One of them does. And that's the one that always causes the problem with selling it or fixing it or keeping it or turning it into a rental, all those things. So I'm really a really big believer in this. So again, you get a $100 discount by using the promo code Mortgage Nerd. So when you call Jim or talk to the assistant, you can mention that. You'll get a $100 discount for listening to the show today. And we're going to do a drawing. So if you type in the comments, I need a trust, and it's no funkier words, just trust, the word trust. I mean, anyway. So if you put that in there, I need a trust, we're going to do a drawing on July 1st, and that person will get their trust for free. Other than, again, any kind of other add-ons and stuff
transfer.
like that. Yeah, deed transfers or somewhere they have a lot of different properties and it's a little more complicated. But at least that base part gets out of the way, and that saves you money right off the bat. I'm just such a big believer in having a trust set up.
That's great.
So we got a few more minutes. Any other last comments? Do you want to give out your phone number or anything else? We got a few more seconds here. But
yeah, you bet. I was going to say, so if anybody wants to, sometimes texting for a lot of people is easier as well. So again, if you want to text, you can text me at 801-656-7137. And then my email is jim@easylegalplanning.com.
Yep.
So
Let's
pretty
pull up
simple.
that site one more time for everybody. We got a couple seconds left. So again, here it is, easylegalplanning.com. Stop putting it off. I mean, this isn't sponsored by Easy Legal Planning. This is truly an expert in the industry, cost effective. You've been putting it off for too long because you're scared of the time or scared of the cost. Don't put it off any longer. You can't do it after you've passed away.
Yep.
So you got to do it now. So appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
This has been the Clear to Close podcast. Please submit your comments, questions, and topics for future episodes to cleartoclosepod@gmail.com. That's clear the number 2, closepod@gmail.com or ryanbolton.com. Please like, follow, and share. And until next time, this is the Clear to Close podcast. The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of Patriot Home Mortgage, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 299717. This has been a production from a podcast studio.